I know my wife always told me when I was working on the books with Paul Brand, Philip, you're missing the real story. The real story is Margaret Brand. Because here's a woman who was also a doctor, became a surgeon, specialty in the eyes, and at the same time she raised 6 children and did all these incredible things.
Margaret Brand became the world's foremost authority on ocular leprosy. She traveled the world combating a hideous disease, yet she understood that her success was not based solely on her abilities.
And just give yourself up to God. Let Him have control. I think that was the most important thing I ever did. The night I felt I'd committed to Christ was, come on board, Lord. I can't do it by myself. I need you.
Vision for God. Dr. Margaret Brand, the woman who first helped lepers to see on this day of discovery. Margaret grew up in South Africa with parents who were adventurous and hardworking. Her father worked in public health, directing an infectious disease hospital, a field his daughter would become very familiar with in the coming years.
Whereas she spent many formative years in South Africa where her father was a doctor, it was not a Christian family, he was not a Christian medical missionary, and he had 3 daughters. And he was determined that these 3 girls would be professionals, which was absolutely unheard of in the 1920s. Women who didn't get married and have children, their only options would be nursing or teaching. And a lot of the women who did that ended up being single all of their lives. But for a woman to think of becoming a barrister or becoming a physician, there weren't many schools that took women, and it was unheard of. But he was determined that his girls would do that.
Margaret finished at the top of her class in medical school, just nosing out her future husband, Paul Brand.
Regarding the God-given abilities that Margaret had, they were substantial. And I think this is one of the reasons that she is so humble, because she was just sort of programmed from birth to work incredibly hard and had a drive to accomplish things because they needed to be accomplished, not because of any personal glory.
Margaret and Paul were married in England in 1943.
Well, I couldn't have imagined being married to a more wonderful guy. I fell in love with him very quickly. Probably faster than he did with me.
After graduation, Paul pursued a career in surgery, while Margaret began work in pediatrics. They both felt a strong calling to use medicine to serve God in a foreign country.
So even before we were married, we knew that we might very possibly end up somewhere, on some mission field, in some country, somewhere in the world, wherever the Lord sent us. My family was not very happy with it. I was not raised in a Christian home. Paul's family, of course, was delighted, especially his mom.
In 1946, Paul was asked to join the Christian Medical College in Vellore, India, as one of 2 general surgeons on staff. He decided to go survey the situation before sending for Margaret and their 2 young children. Margaret was unsure if she should go, and many family and friends were opposed to it.
Paul came on his own, and I was raising this new baby and Christopher, little toddler, and I was living with my parents, seeing the British newspapers, hearing British news, and it was becoming gloomier and gloomier by the day. The worst possible things were going to happen when the British pulled out. All hell was going to break loose in India. There would be a bloodbath, and probably every white person would be slaughtered. I mean, people were exaggerating with dire prognosis. But you can imagine the effect it had on my family and me. Now, Paul's letters were coming so cheerful. He never mentioned anything about that, because here in the South, there wasn't the same Muslim minority problem. They were very much a minority, and they were keeping a pretty low profile. Whereas up north, there was much more of a balance between the two sects, and therefore much more violence.
With the pressure mounting, Margaret's strength came from her trust in God. He helped her make the decision to go to India, a trip that would dramatically change the direction of her career.
I mean, that was one of the things I said to him the night that I took him on board, as it were, asked him to come into my life. Take me wherever you will. Do with me whatever you want. I just want to have you. I didn't know anything about ophthalmology. I thought I was a pediatrician when I arrived. So when I came to India, they said, well, we do need somebody to help out in pediatrics. I said, okay, I'll help. I did it only part-time because I had the children at home, Christopher and Jean, to look after. At the end of that year, the staffing situation in pediatrics improved. And they said, well, where would you like to work now? And my answer was, I don't mind where you put me, just as long as it isn't in the eye department.
Despite her objections, Margaret ended up at the Shell Eye Hospital, where she received on-the-job training treating common eye problems. Later, she would be confronted with a disease she knew even less about. Leprosy, now called Hansen's disease to lessen the social stigma, destroys the nerves. The bacillus attacks the cooler areas of the body, the hands, feet, face, and most devastating, the eyes. Because patients cannot feel pain in their limbs or eyes, they often injure them, causing severe ulcers, which eventually lead to the amputation of limbs or blindness.
Well, I had to find out why they were going blind. You have to get back to the roots of things. And so I started, and it was through the encouragement of Dr. Job and Dr. Fritchie here, who were on the staff at that time, that they assigned a room, tiny little room here in this hospital, and it didn't have much space to offer me, but they very kindly allocated a tiny little space. I didn't hear any voice saying, this is your job, but I had this burning curiosity. I had to find out why their eyes went that way. And I've been looking for answers to that ever since. Blindness is not inevitable, as many patients thought it was. We can do things to stop it, but it's going to need a great deal of work on their part and discipline, not to rub eyes, to put in the drops, to come and get checked, and the doctors take them seriously anytime there's a red eye, and they will often, with deformed, infected fingers, rub an open eye. They tear the little epithelium, the skin as it were, of the cornea off it, and they will inoculate it with whatever's on their hands. And within a few days, they will start an ulcer of the cornea. Well, they neglect that because it doesn't hurt. I've seen patients arrive here at this hospital with the most awful looking eyes. And I say to them, why didn't you come sooner? And many times the answer has been, only yesterday it began to hurt, by which time the eye is half destroyed. It's not that they don't have any sensation, but that their sensation has been so damaged by the leprosy itself that it's no longer protective. The patients who've lost sensation don't seem to mind that they can't close, and their eyes get dry, they get injured, they get neglected. Those are the ones who go blind. They get horrible ulcers when they neglect those.
Many times, Margaret had to show tough love in order to get patients to buy into a treatment that would eventually help them. Her reputation caused one patient to avoid her completely.
His response when he was told he'd got to go to the eye clinic was, "There's nothing wrong with my eyes, it's my foot that's in trouble." And they said, you better go, because that doctor, the word they would say was, that Dr. Ma, that lady doctor, she's got a terrible temper. She'll be so angry with you if you don't go and let her look at you. So he kind of came along under some duress. And then he brings along a friend of his from the village. And many others came because of him. I just get the feeling that God is much more involved in caring about suffering than we sometimes think. I also feel that God doesn't say to us, you're not going to suffer. But that suffering can bring us closer to Him and make us more the kind of people that we are or should be.
When Margaret would come, she would bring the human element, the compassionate element. He would, for example, start telling a story of one of his patients and how he used this particular technique, and it had never been done before, but he moved this tendon over here and then this tendon over here. And then she would come into the room and hear the story and say, oh yes, and do you remember his little sister? And she would fill in the background of the whole family. Margaret had that deep human compassion. Compassion literally means to suffer with, compassio in Latin. And here was a surgeon who spent her life helping people, but she suffered with them. She felt their pain, as it were, and they became to her her extended family.
I think that's the great thing to do, is to let God give us the desires of our heart. And that means just staying close to God as much as we can, talking to Him plenty during the day, staying with His children, staying with His Word. And there are lots of things we waste our time on that we don't need, and we can be using them other ways. Hello, good morning to you.
I've been here for 15 years now, and what happened in those 1 month when she was there in the department, when I worked with her, when I sat with her, listened to her, did a lot to really, change the course of my career. I never expected to be in ocular leprosy at all.
And she can see with that. Okay, that's good.
If I hadn't met Margaret and Margaret hadn't walked into my life, I probably would have gone back to Madras from the Christian Medical College where I was working, and probably got into a private practice and made a lot of money and built a couple of houses and had 3 or 4 cars.
I've described Paul Brand as being a humble person. Margaret Brand is humble almost to the point of being self-effacing. If you tried to give her credit for anything, she would immediately say, oh, well, I certainly didn't come up with that on my own. I'm sure someone helped me with that. And she truly is a world-renowned expert on how leprosy affects the eyes.
God's grace, she's improving.
Now, did she have surgery?
No. First, we did for the sight.
But she's now got some sight in her left eye, and she's just so thrilled.
But because she didn't have formal training in medical school in ophthalmology, she'll always immediately try to downplay that.
When we went to Carville, that was where I became more aware of her accomplishments. As a physician, I became more aware of the things that she was doing in her own right. And that was when she really took off and was traveling around the world, going to these wild places in South America with practically nobody there. I mean, she would ride these little remote buses in the hills of who knows where, and visiting the very remote colonies and teaching and encouraging people. And that was really the time that I became most aware of her and her medical accomplishments.
I know my wife always told me when I was working on the books with Paul Brand, Philip, you're missing the real story. The real story is Margaret Brand. Because here's a woman who was also a doctor, became a surgeon, specialty in the eyes, and at the same time she raised 6 children and did all these incredible things.
Margaret can give a sermon and convert someone in a dentist's office while she sits down next to them and is talking to them. She's probably affected as many people as Paul, although she hasn't been doing it from a pulpit.
கர்த்தருக்கு காத்திருக்கிறவர்களோ புது பலன் அடைந்து கழுகு போல செட்டிகளை அடித்து எழும்புவார்கள். அவர்கள் ஓடினாலும் இளைப்படையாய்
Margaret's longtime cook and housekeeper, Araldus, and his wife Menominee became lifelong friends. Margaret and her family have supported them over the many years since they left India.
And we paid for that little house that they live in. And that was something, just to have a home. It's not a great home, but it's about the same standard as the homes around. And that's the important thing, that you don't stand out one way or the other from your community. You fit in. And he calls it Brand Cottage.
Shantygram is a community for leprosy patients who are blind or otherwise so incapacitated by the disease that they cannot live on their own.
Yes. Many times there comes a stage in a patient's life when the disease has had too much time. They've been untreated or inadequately treated, and the disease has robbed them of something precious: sight, hands, feet. But further, the disease has robbed them of the fellowship of family. They've got no one to take care of them. They can't get a job. Thank you, Pa.
He says we are totally rejected. People didn't care for us because of the disease when they looked at our hands and feet. But now we have a place to stay, we have food to eat, and we have people who love us, so that makes us happy.
Indeed. Yes. Thank you very much. And some of them are already Christians, and they are part of our family. We've got to take care of them. And it was Ernest Fritchie's wife who had the dream that we would start this home here. Mano Fritchie. There was a little dedication stone to her. And so they've got a home now. They'll never be turned out of that place. And they can come here for treatment. They'll be fed. They'll be loved. And so that's what we need. Thank you.
And that style of medicine that both Paul and Margaret showed was really an incarnational style of going down to the least of these and restoring their own image, their own belief that they are valued, that they are loved by God.
I think one of the things that you have to learn on the mission field is wait, be patient. Don't lose sight of your original vision. The vision is the substance of things. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
One of the things that I learned from both Paul and Margaret is how distorted our own society is with our emphasis on physical beauty. Go to any magazine rack in any drugstore in the United States or Europe, and all you see is pictures of beautiful people, beautiful bodies, how to stay fit, how to get rid of your wrinkles, how to straighten your teeth. And Dr. Brand and both Paul and Margaret spent their lives among ugly people, among people who certainly couldn't afford an orthodontist, among people who had defects and deformities. And yet as they reflected on their lives, the people who most impressed them, who most showed the Spirit of Christ, the Spirit of Jesus, were ugly people.
And then the Lord gave me the opportunity of working in the States in this big National Leprosarium in Carville, Louisiana, where Paul and I were for 22 years. And then I was able to follow about at least 300 of my patients then over 22 years. So the first 500 cases gave me a sort of horizontal view, and the next ever so many years, I got this extended, what we call the long-term surveillance of these people, watching them over the years. And really that's been a unique opportunity for me.
And even today, she is flying around different parts of the world giving lectures. She's one of the top experts in the world on how leprosy can affect the eyes. When I hear the stories of Margaret in the old days, they would go out into these eye camps and do cataract surgeries where they would sometimes a team of surgeons would do 100 to 150 cataract operations a day, outdoors, under a tree.
You know, small things like this, we don't earn much here. We have our ups and downs. We have this is an institution where things can go wrong. Sometimes you get depressed. But throughout it all, I think Margaret's support, advice, enthusiasm to keep this thing going, because we are serving people who will not be served anywhere else, really kept us going. And that was one thing which made us stay here for so long.
And then one cannot deny the legacy of the family that they created. 6 children raised in faith, and I think that that would be very meaningful to them as part of the legacy that they've left.
She was very much the mom, and just wonderful. I would always my goals in raising the children would be to try and be as good of a mom as she was.
I don't think I can have any reason to be proud of anything. I'm just thankful. Thankful that the Lord has trusted us. You know, going back to that story I've just told you, He would have found somebody else to do our work. But we would have missed a wonderful adventure. And I'm just so thankful to Him that He enabled us to follow through.
It was never how much money did I make or how many surgeries did I perform. I think at the end of each day it was God pleased with what I did.
Speaking for them, they would have said they gave up nothing, and I think that's true. I think that what characterized them and characterized all of their children is this blooming wherever you're planted, be it in Louisiana, be it in India or in England. They have the wonderful capability to enjoy wherever they are and to adapt and to absolutely flourish. Both of them were filled with drive and intelligence to accomplish great things, and could do so wherever they were. But India was something that fed their energy, and I don't think they would ever feel that they had sacrificed to go there. Most of the children never really wanted to leave if they'd had the opportunity, but the Brands had done what they accomplished to do. They had established an Indian faculty. They'd gone there, trained the local people who went on to take over, and felt that their work was accomplished. And unlike some other people, they were able to step aside and let the next brainy, successful people grow there as well, which continues to this day.
Margaret recalled meeting a young man whose father, Artie, was helped by Paul and her many years ago. Paul had asked Artie to help them learn the local language, Tamil. Because Paul and Margaret needed to understand Luke's gospel in his language, Artie translated every word, and in the process they answered his many questions and had deep discussions about the Bible. Artie's son now shared with Margaret the impact this had on his entire family.
Because of what your husband and you were able to do, our whole family has become Christian. And it was so touching. I nearly cried. It was a great moment. And that was years ago. And you never know the seed you sow today, maybe 40 or 50 years before anybody's going to see a harvest. But here was a whole family that had come out of the gutter, that had come out of the dark into the light. And the Lord had given us a little part in bringing them there. What can you say except hallelujah? You want to feel that your life is making a difference. We all do that. There's something basic in us. But I think it all starts with turning to God, wanting Him enough in my life that I'm willing to take the risk of bringing Him into my life. And it's always a risk. He might tell you to do something awful that you didn't want to have to do. Go to some horrible place to work. But He'll give you the desires. He gives you the desire, puts the desire in your mind, in your heart. Psalm 37, verse 4, I think it is, or 8, He gives us the desires of our heart.